What's cracking, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Doing another live coffee with Kensou here on twitch.tv/ShinKensou. Be there, be square. All of you. Today we want to talk about a topic that I think definitely needs to be talked about, and it is player weaknesses versus character weaknesses in fighting games. Some of this can be applied to other games as well, but in particular we could talk about fighting games. This is what we play the most here on this channel. I do believe that this definitely is a topic that a lot of players kind of don't like to acknowledge, or they push to the wayside because they like to blame their character for their weaknesses or, you know, lack of skills with their character. Let me go out on a limb and thank, you know, the boy Kensou for giving me this topic to talk about here for us today. So big ups to him. Moving forward, where this gets blurred, right, is people not exhausting all their options as a player with their character. You know, because in some cases, sometimes it's the player's fault, right? Sometimes the character actually has the tools necessary. I won't say all the tools, but the tools necessary to actually win, right? But sometimes the player behind the character isn't piloting that character properly, or they're not taking advantage of all the options that they have in front of them, right? So they'll say, for example, this poke sucks, right? Let's say X poke sucks. It may suck in a specific matchup, right? But it doesn't mean it sucks overall, right? So let's say in Street Fighter, you know, in this case, I'll use like Lucia, right? Lucia's low forward isn't good in comparison to, I don't know, say Urien. Of course, you know, both of them have decent range. Obviously Urien has better range. Does it mean that her low forward is bad in this matchup? No, not necessarily, right? It just means that like Urien has more range, and the range in which you need to play at to make that button good is a lot closer. So then you have to devise a strategy around Urien's buttons with that one button, right? And how you can make that one button work with the rest of your normals. You see what I'm saying? And I mean, that's kind of like in a very simplistic fashion. I'm using Street Fighter because it's a very simple game. It's kind of easier to understand that as opposed to Guilty Gear. If we were to take it from a Guilty Gear standpoint, same thing. You know, Soul's 6 heavy. I'm sorry, his 6 slash or forward slash, the big swipe, right? There's a range in which you can play at to make maybe one of your normals really good around it, right? So let's say you're playing, I don't know, I'll use Chip just because that's who I play the most, right? Obviously we can 6P that back, but we have to read 6P. So instead of reading, we can play a more proactive game to stay around that area to whiff punish it, right? And that's exhausting a typical option, which would be whiff punishing. That's something every character can do, you know? So where does this come into with like the character flaws? Obviously characters have flaws where like a button is weak, or like, let's say they have low HP or what have you, right? There's always a reason why a character has a flaw, right? The developers tend to make characters to have flaws more often than not than to make like the perfect character, because if you make the perfect character, then it gets too overbearing for the players, etc, etc. Not to say that hasn't happened in fighting game history, that'd be a complete lie, right? But it's happened. So the trick here is to figure out what your character's weakness is and try to play around that, because they have to have the weakness. But it doesn't mean that the player can't overcome that weakness, right? Like, let's say, you know, there's tons of stories of players playing characters that are like heralded as not very good, but then they end up maximizing every nook and cranny, every micro situation to push the character to the top. And more often than not, what ends up happening is a lot of people, they see that, they get excited, and then they want to try the character out themselves and realize that it's hard to do that. And that player has spent an immense amount of time to maximize that character at that level, you know. And it comes back again with not acknowledging that, you know. And this happens a lot, right? And I'll tell you, as someone who's won tournaments with Chip previously, they'll see that and they're like, man, I want to do that too. They pick it up and they come back and then tell me, man, this is a lot harder than I thought. And I'm like, yeah, of course, you know, it's not easy to play a low HP character like Chip and like come out on top. There's a lot of nuance you have to know about your character, the matchups, who you're playing, etc, etc. Like, especially dealing with the matchup, it's not even a matter about, you can just pull away who you're playing from the equation. Like, if you can't beat the character matchup, then you don't really have any hope to beat the player. you know, unless they're just ignorant to the matchup, right? Then you can abuse things if they don't know. But not everyone steps into a tournament match or high level match thinking that the opponent doesn't know how to play this matchup, right? It's safe to assume that at the highest level of play, that each player understands the matchup to whatever varying degrees. You know, like you have had to have played it or at least labbed it to know what general things you should do in the matchup before you can even get to the player matchup, right? So what ends up happening a lot of the time, like I said before, is just, you know, people lose, right? And then they blame the character. They say the character can't do this, the character can't do that. And it's like, well, if you look at the design of the character, right? So let's say you're playing a zoner. It's very clear the zoner is not meant to rush down, but the zoner does have some capabilities to rush down, right? It's like trying to play rush down Axel. It doesn't mean you can't play it. It just means it's not going to be anywhere near as effective as, say, like Soul, Amelia, you know, what have you, Giovanna. Like, it's not gonna be as effective because he doesn't have necessarily the tools to make an oppressive pressure game. He's got good tools that really work well for him, but his pressure game is gonna only be so good because he's not designed to pressure at heavy, right? Every character in Guilty Gear in particular is designed, and any other fighting game, they do have, you know, they are designed to have some kind of up close game, because otherwise they would just, you know, they'll just lose because they have one aspect of their game that they can't win at. But that also goes to character weaknesses, right? So as a player, like say you're playing Dhalsim, you have to be good at the up close game, because guess what? People are gonna get in your face. There's no two ways about it. Like, they're gonna get in your face, right? But it doesn't mean that Dhalsim can't rush down. It means that you have to be good at both rushing down, and then another part of it is being good on defense with your up close normals. So it's a give and take, you know? So when you get into that mode as a player, when you start like making excuses for your character not being able to do something, that really sucks. And I think that takes away from your opponent sometimes. Like, and I'll be the first to say, I understand the point of view of complaining about your character, because I think it happens to all of us. You know, I'm not immune of that either. You know, I've definitely done it before in the past, and I'm not mercy of that. These days in particular, I don't like to blame my character. I tend to blame the developers more often than not for making them that way. But, you know, even then, I still find ways to work around those issues, because if you enjoy the character, you'll have to do that. You don't have a choice, right? You really don't have a choice. You have to play the character the way they're meant to be played, and or find other strategies to help push the meta of that character, right? Because every character, like, there's definitely a way a character is meant to be played, and then there's a way to break the mold and push at the same envelope for the way it's meant to be played, and push that further up. You know, it doesn't just stop at this one point. There's other levels, other layers which you can reach to. But I'll also be the first to admit, not every player has the capacity to take it to that level. And I think that's something where it's kind of like another topic in itself with like self-reflection. And I guess this kind of goes hand in hand, I guess. We can kind of push it into that realm as well. Like, not enough players reflect on what they could be doing better. They just blame what the character can and can't do, instead of really trying to optimize your options. Like, that's what separates like the good from the great, you know? Even if you're playing a top tier character, like, the envelope for the character can be pushed, you know, because if you're playing a top tier character, more often than not, people tend to have strategies for that top tier character. So it's kind of like, you know, you get into that mode where there's like, where you have a friend who plays top tier, or people who play top tier, and then they like complain that their top tier can't do this. And it's like, I mean, your character is like top 3 in the game for a reason. You know, there's a reason why your character's in the top 3, you know? It's there. Like, there's a reason. So you need to unlock that. And yes, a lot of times when people play top tier, they kind of, in a lot of ways, they have to outplay people who don't. I think in some cases, the top tier users have to outplay other people who understand top tiers, right? Like, let's say they have, like, there tends to be characters in fighting games that tend to be top tier killers. And some people play those characters, and they have to outplay the person that's playing that top tier killer character, you know? So it's never free. It's never free. Why blame the developers though? Well, sometimes the developers have, like, sometimes they'll overlook something and they'll forget that like the character may need something. And it's happened plenty of times in other games, right? Where something should have just been like that from the start. And like, oh, we patched this in. It's like, why'd you patch it in? It should have been here. You know, this would have made the character better. You know, it's not like, in some cases, some things aren't actually toxic to the game. It's just, why didn't you do this in the first place? Like, Anji is a prime example of like what I'm talking about. Like, Anji could have came into Guilty Gear Strive the way he is now, or even 1.09, right? If you came into the game like he was in 1.09 at launch, where he is now could be even further in terms of what he's capable of doing. So it's kind of like, y'all had the ability to do this. All you had to do is program it, you know? So it's stuff like that, right? Sometimes I feel like they have a clear bias. Sometimes developers have bias. I know for a fact ArcSys has definitely had bias in BlazBlue because they let Arakune be really strong because they really like the character. Like the developers of BlazBlue really liked Arakune, and they let that character do a lot of crazy stuff for a good while before they finally said, okay, we need to be fair, you know? So, and it's not unheard of, you know, Capcom did it with Yun. We thought Yun was having trouble getting in, so we gave him EX Rush Punches +1 on block. That's pretty bad. That's actually clear developer bias. There's just dev bias exists in everything, even in shooting games, etc., etc. There's clearly sometimes there's things that they want to see get pushed because they know players are gonna push it, you know. So it's not even a question. It's just more like, why? Why not just give everyone a chance? So, but you know, moving forward, like even pulling developers out of the equation, right? We can look at again, like players have to learn to exhaust all their options. But you know, one of the biggest flaws in that actually is it comes with self-reflection, right? But it's also players not utilizing the tools that are in front of them. The training modes in the newer fighting games are so amazing now that you, in a lot of ways, you can take everything that you've lost to and just put it in training mode straight away. Like, you don't even have to think about it. It's like, I lost to this, okay, just do that, you know? But I think a lot of people think the training mode portion of fighting games is boring, which is the equivalent to people thinking that going to the gym is boring, right? They don't like going to the gym. They just want to see the results. They don't care about sitting, you know, at a bench pressing week after week, day after day, you know what I mean, 3 or 4 times a week. They want the instant results, you know. They don't want to go to the training portion. So, and it's understandable, right? Because like, it's video games, why should I have to train? Well, you want to be good, that's a requirement, you know. That's the hard part. That's also true. A lot of people do realize that there is a margin of what's playable versus broken. I agree. I think too many people compartmentalize in their mind that a character is just downright weak and just never reflect on themselves. And you know, this is kind of what this is what the topic is about, right? Like, they don't take that into consideration. They just immediately they downplay and stuff like that. And you know, it's almost in a sense in some cases where a lot of people, they blame the character and they don't ever, how to put this? It's like the downplay comes in, so if you cry hard enough that maybe the developers will give you something that's downright broken, and then it's like, yeah, now I'm winning because the developer threw me a bone. Well, it's like the character was already good. You know, you could have just exhausted what the character had and improved yourself, you know? I don't think they'll add replay extras like they did in Plus R. If they did, this would be a different game. But, you know, no one wants to take the responsibility, and I think that's the issue. Like, the training modes are so good now that, like, it's literally like, I don't know. This is crazy to say, but in some cases, I don't understand how a player can actually be. Like, if you understand fighting games, at least on an intermediate level, I'll understand if you're a beginner. Like, a downright beginner is understandable. I'm not gonna blame anyone who just started fighting games, right? But if you've played fighting games enough and you're roughly at an intermediate level, like, the training modes give you everything. Like, everything you could possibly need to be a good player and be more knowledgeable at the game is in front of you. But it's understandable, again, before, like, not everyone understands how to training mode, not everyone knows how to lab. It's kind of like telling a person, hey, you know, dang, a guy who goes to the gym versus a guy who doesn't. You don't have a training regimen? What's wrong with you, bro? Like, you don't know how to train? You don't know how to go to the gym? So it's like, not everyone has that analytical mind or knows how to break stuff down, which is why it's phenomenal that we have content creators and stuff like that to help players kind of push themselves in the right direction with proper content, which is the big reason why I love the FPS content and stuff like that, League and those MOBAs and those games like that, because there's tons of tutorial content that helps people get into the right mode to play, you know. So that's always like a good thing to see. I do think we need more of that in fighting games. That's what I've been trying to do for a good while now. It's part of the reason why Coffee with Kensou exists anyway. It's a big reason why this series exists. Right? Blaming character faults can be an easier pill to swallow than admitting you were the reason you lost. Yeah. It's almost amazing to me sometimes people have characters that can just do literally everything and they just say the character can't do this. It's like if your character's weak at something, it's because the developers didn't want them to be super strong at this. But it doesn't mean you can't do it. It just means it's not the character's forte. You as a player can make that your forte and make that your specialty with the character. And that essentially could push the envelope for the character, which is what I said earlier. There's ways you can push the envelope with the character if you're willing to sit there and put in the time. But I think a big problem with a lot of the fighting game players now is they're only as good as the last Twitter tech that's put out. And I think that's a big problem. It's good in the sense that we learn faster, but it's bad because unless someone puts something out, it feels to me like some players are just stagnant because they don't know how to evolve. And, you know, like I said before, I can't really blame them for it because not everyone has an analytical mind to understand how to push themselves in that regard. So it's in some cases it's a catch-22. In some cases, not all, but you know, there's always also the herd mentality. But I'm not gonna get too big on that right now. So it's serious, man. Like, getting better at fighting games, in all honesty, nowadays isn't really that hard. But I think there still needs to be a degree of showing people how to do it. And the other half of showing people how to do it is that they want to have to do it, you know. Because a good chunk of the time, like, a player's weakness is kind of attributed because they're just smashing their face in mad games, but they're not learning. Which is another topic in itself, but just to briefly touch on that, like, you can play mad games and still not learn shit. It's true. You can probably learn diddly squat just playing a bunch of games. You'll get it over time, right? And the prime example of this is like people who mash their face in on mad games and just, you know, and it's no disrespect to those guys who have auras in, like, you know, Celestial and Guilty Gear right now, but there's mad people who have auras in Celestial, and it's just like, probably got that through playing with your friends, you know? And it's not like I'm capping on them or anything like that. It's just, you can have an aura, but it doesn't mean that you're good, you know? It doesn't matter. You have an aura on your character? Okay, cool. Does that mean that I, as a player, should be afraid of you because you have an aura? No. It means you play a lot. I play a lot too, but it's not always in Celestial. I play a lot in training mode. I play a lot of lobby matches. I play a lot of player matches. I go in between all those things, so my level in the game is not reflective of actually how good I am. See what I'm saying? So, in some cases, your rank can definitely prove how good you are. In others, it's just, generally speaking, I've always seen it as people who play a lot. Just literally just play a lot. But it doesn't mean that they're bad players. It also doesn't mean that they're good players either. That's my point. So, if people pushed themselves more in reflecting on their losses and figuring out how to improve as a player, then I think we would have less complaints about character flaws. But, you know, again, it doesn't mean that characters don't... I should put this on the flip side too really quickly. It doesn't mean that a character does not have problems, right? Like, there's some characters, like, if your character's just downright low tier, obviously that character has issues, right? But, again, if you want to play that character, then you have to play to that character's... You have to find out what makes that character strong, right? You could be low tier because certain options are, like, harder. Doesn't mean the character won't get buffed, but let's say that your character is on the lower end of the spectrum, right? What are you gonna do? Pick up another character to help back him up? Maximize the character to the best of your ability? You know? And I guess that kind of goes into being the low tier hero, which there's nothing wrong with that, as long as you're not blaming the character too much. I feel like if you're gonna play a low tier, you have to accept it, right? You have to accept it. Like, accepting that your character is like weak, but you're strong and you're pushing the envelope, that's fine. Not everyone has that fortitude to want to deal with that crap, trust me. Not everyone's trying to be a low tier hero. A lot of people trying to, you know, if I'm to be honest, a lot of people nowadays in FGC are trying to just secure the bag and pick whatever's cheap, and try to like get the quick wins and stuff like that. But then that only lasts for so long. You know, that's another topic in itself right there too, man. We got mad topics we go over, trust me. This like, cause this topic in particular stems into so many other facets of playing fighting games. And trust me, man, I've seen it over the years, man. Like, Japanese players who take weak characters and they just make them spectacular. And there's some things that they do that you would never have expected those characters to be capable of doing at all. And you see it and you're like, man, I want to try that. And you try it and you're like, man, this is hard. But that dude's laid down the foundation. So it's up to you if you want to take that character to that next level like he is. And who knows, maybe with that point, the character could get buffed. And then like your entire foundation that you've built upon while the character was weak has improved. Of course, in some cases, from a competitive standpoint, this does get tricky in terms of blaming your character and stuff like that. But I feel like as long as you're playing competitively or not, I think you should just do your best not to blame your character. And if you lose, you need to just reflect on yourself and why you lost. Because decision making comes into play, right? You can have a strong character and still make poor decisions. You know, happens a lot. People try to quickly pick a top tier and like, all right, cool. Top tier is gonna make me win now. All right, I picked this character. All I gotta do is run the program. It's not that simple. You know, that only lasts for maybe like the first year of the game. After that point, buffs, nerfs happen and things like that. And it's like, if you're not prepared, if that character still happens to be top tier, for whatever reason, right? Other characters are gonna get buffed too. Other players are gonna get better. So if you're still stuck in the past on how that character was good, like, it's not the character at that point. It's really just you. You know, you can have a strong character and still be bad, or still not play that character well, rather. So, yeah, man. I just, you know, with this, I guess, kind of like to put the nail in the coffin in this talk is, you know, don't blame your character too much. You know, maybe there's aspects of your character you're not looking at. Maybe there's aspects of the game you're not looking at. Sometimes you have to remember that, like, the game system can favor your character. You know, let's say maybe their kit isn't the strongest kit, right? But the game system plus your character's kit can be a deadly combination, right? There's also player skill involved. Like, player skill is a thing. The ability to outplay your opponent, that is also a thing. You know? You can take all your weaknesses and make them all strengths if you put in the time and work to get to that point. Straight up. You can. I am living proof of that. It is not impossible. You know? You just have to want to do it. It's not easy. I'm gonna keep saying it is not easy to take a character that you like, especially if they're not the strongest character, be it mid-tier, low mid-tier, what have you, and try to make them work. But I can assure you, if you learn the game system, man, sometimes the game system is all you need. In other cases, it's not. But it just depends on the game. I'm not gonna speak on every fighting game for that matter, but a lot of times nowadays in these fighting games, they're trying to make things a lot more evenish. Like, I feel like Guilty Gear Strive's current patch, which I won't talk too much on, I think is a really good patch, and a lot of things are a lot more equal. Sure, there's a little bit more crazy in some places, but I think overall it's still, I think it makes the game more exciting to play. I think that's something developers want to do, is to keep their game exciting to play. So don't blame the character. Blame yourself. Reflect on yourself. That's the end thing. Reflect on yourself. Think about what you can always do better. And always remember, man, like, you can always do better. You can always do better. You just have to put in the time and be objective about why you lost. Because the path to improvement in fighting games and just competitive gaming in general, like it's a long road. Like no one's perfect. You know, you can do your best to play close to perfect or just play to the best of your ability. And trust me when I say you'll go very far. So I think that'll do it with this talk. Let me know how you guys feel about this in the comments below. Talk to me how you feel about player weaknesses versus character weaknesses. And I'll end it here. I'll catch you guys in the next coffee. Deuces, gooses.